Hi, welcome to the Leadership Standard. I'm Jamie Mason Cohen, and we have with us today an award-winning keynote speaker, an 11-time New York Times bestselling author, host of the top-rated corporate competitor podcast, storyteller and resident at National Geographic, executive leadership coach, and longtime associate editor at Sports Illustrated. Throughout his writing career, Don has developed a reputation as a world-class storyteller. As a matter of fact, John Maxwell and Simon Sinek have called Don the best storyteller they have ever worked with. This has led him to work with some of the leading companies in the world and being a guest on Oprah, Fox Business News, CNN, Good Morning America, and more. In 2020, Don launched the Corporate Competitor Podcast, which Podcast Magazine recognizes one of the top 50 podcasts in America. He has spoken to Condoleezza Rice, CEOs of Disney, Delta, Bank of America, Hendrick Motorsports, Topgolf, BET Media, Ritz-Carlton, and more. So that's why it's such an honor and a privilege to speak today with Don Yaeger. Don, welcome to the Leadership Standard.
Thanks, Jamie. Gosh, I listened to you say all those things, and suddenly I was feeling older just sitting here. So anyway, that was a kind intro. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure. So I'd love to dive into your journey, because so often in the research I've done and the books I've read, you focus on others and their journey. I would like to start with you. And can you take us back to the beginning, where you developed this love, this passion, and this skill of storytelling?
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, storytelling for me really came from, I'm the son of a preacher. My father was a fantastic storyteller. He was constantly working on the craft, and he used to talk to me all the time about the importance of storytelling. He would say that if I could be a better storyteller, I'd never run out of places that would offer me an opportunity to work for them, because people want to be surrounded by others who can tell good stories. And I never really paid a lot of attention to it. And then when I was at home for my Thanksgiving, my freshman year in college, my dad, we had this fantastic Thanksgiving dinner that we always hosted. My family did. Dozens of people from all walks of life were invited over, and that one day I watched my dad get up and tell a story that had the entire audience or gathering of people just riveted. And I suddenly, sometimes you have to get away from your parents a little while in order to come back and see a little bit of their wisdom. And that was the day that things really began to change for me. And I started studying other great storytellers. That became kind of a passion. I wanted to see what others did well, so that I could try to figure out how I could learn to emulate it. And I spent 30 years studying the best storytellers out there, with hopes of one day being part of that community.
Yeah, and one of your mentors, if I could use that term, is actually your father, from what I've read. Would that be accurate?
No question. I didn't really appreciate his skill as a storyteller until I started studying storytelling, and then I started realizing what he was doing, how he would draw people in, how he would use certain tactics, certain methods to get people to feel connected to him, and through that connection they would grow to trust him. And that's what a great storyteller does. They gain your trust through the ways that they do it, and then as you get drawn closer to them, you begin to believe, that's somebody whose interest I'd love to pay a little more attention to.
And your father also asked you a question or gave you some advice early on, from what I read, after graduating from university, that had a significant impact on your present path. Can you talk a little more about that?
Oh yeah. It was fun. I had graduated from college, university, as you mentioned, and I was heading to my first job, which was down in Texas. and I'd gone to university in Indiana, up in the Middle West, and so I had a 1,200-mile drive ahead of me. And as we were standing in the driveway, my dad looked at me and he said, because you've chosen journalism as your profession, I was going to spend the rest of my life, I thought, writing stories about other people. He said, you will have the good fortune of spending time in the presence of people that most of the rest of us would give anything to talk to. You will get to interview them just because that's going to be your new job. He said, I'm sure you'll always ask the questions you should ask for the benefit of your readers, but always ask one question that will make you better from everyone you get a chance to learn from. And as he and I talked about it, there was this thought that if I could come up with the same question that many people, that I could gather a lot of answers to, I would just get better at being, I would be a better person. Forget, a better writer, better leader, whatever. I would be a better person. And so I started asking everybody I interviewed, if you could name one habit that you leaned into, that you built into your daily routine, that every day you believe by the exercising of that habit, that you gained a competitive advantage over someone else, what would that habit be? What do you do every day that gives you a competitive advantage? And I started I started building the answers that I would get from these extraordinary people into a series of notebooks. And 25 years later, when I retired from Sports Illustrated, I sat down and I had 2,500 answers to go through. But it
And
really created for me kind of almost a worksheet of how to get better, right? How to continuously grow me, which is what we should all be in the process of.
And amongst those different questions, amongst those books filled with answers of what the highest performers do consistently, what would be two or three of them that really stood out, or patterns that you saw amongst the greatest?
Oh, wow. Well, the number one answer, the answer that showed up most frequently in some shape or form. I mean, you have to take a bunch of answers and kind of create a single phrase for that answer. Was the truly greatest hate to lose more than they love to win, right? That winning doesn't give exceptional people, being successful doesn't give exceptional people the thrill that it gives some people, right? They expect it. It's what they entered everything they were calculating themselves to do. They expect to win. But failure at just about anything leaves a mark. It makes you curl up a little bit. So how do you learn that? Well, the way you learn it is you learn it by not making excuses when things don't go your way, which is human nature. Human nature is if our conversation isn't going right, I'm blaming you, Jamie. I'm not owning it. It's you. It's got to be you. And so that became a real important single answer for me that really changed me. A second one was that the best understand they're never going to be better than the people they surround themselves with. And so they're vigilant about who they give their time to. And then a third one was that the truly great ones are really good at managing adversity. They know it's promised, that adversity it doesn't surprise them. Some people are like, oh, I can't believe this happened to me. But no, of course it's going to happen to me. Now, what am I going to do? What's the response to adversity? And that's where the great ones really they show amazing skill.
That was really concise, and it helps me move into a few points and transition into some of the ideas from a book that I'll be referencing, one of your extraordinary books, Greatness, 16 Characteristics of true champions, which I thoroughly enjoyed and learned from. So much so that I have Post-it notes. I'll send a
I
picture.
noticed that. Look at that. Post-it notes. That's strong.
And these are little statements, aphorisms, not quotes that help me even as I go through this interview. So I'm going to put those in. But one of them is this one. The first point you said was from Michael Jordan, who you know, and I'm going to ask you in a moment for a really fascinating little story that you have with him. He says a loss is not a failure until you make an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
Can
Isn't
you
that a great line?
It is a great line. Yeah.
Right? Because, a loss happens, but is it a failure? And his answer is no. If you learn from it, it's not a failure. It's a loss. And what we should be afraid of is failure, not losing. And so I love the way that he phrased that, but a loss is not a failure until you make an excuse, which means that's the bright line, right? It's when I blame somebody, when I choose to blame my circumstances or blame the condition of the world or blame the condition of the basketball, if it's in that sport, if I choose to blame and not grow, then it's a failure.
And what was the story where Michael Jordan invited you to basically a game with other distinguished people in various fields, and you had this fascinating one-on-one experience and interaction with him on that court?
Yeah, Jordan for many years hosted an old man basketball camp, and I qualify as an old man. And I love the game of basketball. I have a full court at my house, play all the time. And Jordan, he does this event as a charitable event for Make-A-Wish. And so on the third day of the event, he pulls 20 guys out of the crowd, and he says, today you get to go one-on-one with the greatest player of all time. Taps himself on the chest. And he says, there's really simple rules. In fact, the rules are so simple, I'm going to let my assistant explain them. His assistant steps in, and she says, yes, the rules are simple. So you play a game to one. First guy to score wins. But Michael Jordan starts with the ball. She says, your job is to guard Michael. If somehow Jordan doesn't score and you get the ball, Michael guards you. First guy to score wins. Jordan steps back up, looks at us, and I happen to be one of the 20 guys. And he says, by the way, I've done this for 9 years. In 9 years, 5 guys have ever scored. Today, there won't be a 6th. So he's like, your head is totally lost. Michael Jordan is going to stuff you. You know it. Guy 2 in front of me goes out to guard him, throws his elbow at him, tries to act like he was going to be physically intimidating Michael Jordan. Like, knocks his arm away, one step, one dribble, 2 steps, dunks it, pulls the ball out of the net, throws it on the guy while he's laying on the floor. And he says, now you know what it's like to be spanked like a bad child. Right? He's the greatest trash talker ever. I love trash talking, but Michael Jordan's, he's amazing. 2 guys later, I step in. And when I go out there, I decide I'm not going to let him dunk on me. So I actually back up, and there's distance between he and I, because I'm not going to let him get by me to the basket. Actually, Duke's coach, Mike Krzyzewski, said, Yaeger, you were so far away from him. If you'd wanted to go guard him, you'd had to take a cab, right? But Jordan, actually, there's this great picture. He's got the ball in his left hand. With his right hand, he's calling me out. And he looks at me and he says, are you really going to give me this shot? And I looked back at Michael Jordan and I said, I don't think you have it in you. I don't know. Guys start laughing. Jordan shakes his head, goes up, takes his shot, misses. Ball goes wide left. I get the rebound. I've got it back outside the 3-point line. And Jordan's stepping out to guard me. And I'm like, won't you return the favor? Like, give me the same space. And he says, I know you don't have that shot in you. And as he said that, I jacked it while he was still talking. And from 26 feet, I became the 6th guy to ever score on Michael Jordan at that event. So Yeah, I love playing the game. I love talking trash. I love Michael Jordan. Jordan throughout the next couple days of that event kept talking to me about a rematch. Um, and I kept saying, dude, you had your shot, right?
And the big question is, did he make an excuse?
He made no excuse, no. But what he wanted was an opportunity to make it right. He wanted, and I've never played with him since. So I'm currently 1-0 against Michael Jordan.
Oh, what a story.
It's
And Don, on the second point you made, you said one of the key components that you've seen, and I would imagine this is absolutely relevant, not just for the world of sports, but the world of business, is surrounding yourself with the right people or the best people. And what comes to mind there is something that was referenced in the book, Greatness, but also in your newest book about Coach Prime, Deion Sanders. And he said something to you in your podcast, Corporate Competitor. He said, iron sharpens iron. And to me, there's a direct correlation between surrounding yourself with that statement, iron sharpens iron. Can you expand on what he meant by that?
Sure. It's actually a biblical phrase. It comes from the Bible, but it's this idea that that if we want to be better, we surround ourselves with better. That we will that if that those who want to be stronger, the Navy SEALs are regularly cited as an organization for of high performance. And I've done a little bit of work with them. And one of the things that they'll tell you is A players want to play with A players, right? B players want to play with C players.
Mm.
And B players want somebody to be better than. A players want someone to be equal than. They know they're better when they're with someone that can sharpen their edges. And so that's one of the things that is always been fascinating to me. Coach John Wooden, the basketball coach at UCLA for many years, won more national championships in U.S. men's college basketball than any other coach. He and I had a long-term relationship, and he used to say all the time, you'll never outperform your inner circle. And that if you want to know what your capacity for success is, look at the people you surround yourself with, because you'll never be better than that. And that if you want to be better, improve your circle.
Mm.
And so I always loved that. Right? Iron sharpens iron, and constantly be looking for greater iron to add to your inner circle.
Yes. And he talked about that, Deion, where he said in practice was the time that he surrounded himself with the Jerry Rices and other great players. Andre Rison, I believe.
Rison, Michael
Right?
Irvin. Yeah.
Yeah. So right. So that's a good form of conflict in practice to get himself to that level. And the other example that I love, we don't have to go into too much depth, but I'd never heard of this. So excited that I learned an example that was really inspiring was Sven Nader, who played Sven Nader, who you mentioned with Coach Wooden. And can you talk a little bit about what makes him unique in terms of how he surrounded himself with the very best and how it helped his career?
Yeah, he came out of junior college, in the United States, is that kind of feeder program to the big schools at some stage. And he played 2 years in junior college, and he's 7 foot tall, and he grew to become really good. He wasn't good when he got there, but he became good over 2 years. And he could have gone to any school in the country and probably been the starter, right? Probably been the best player on the team. But Coach Wooden's pitch to him was, you could go and do that, or you can come here, and we happen to have the best player in America at your position, the best player in all of college basketball at your position. And if you want to be better, you should come here. And every day you can get a chance to compete against the best player, which will make you better. And he did. He forsook the opportunities to be a star in another environment to come be the backup to the best player, so that every day in practice he would be sharpening his skills. Ultimately, it led to a long career in the NBA, and he was quite successful, and now is an enormously successful business leader, but largely because he decided to go compete against the best player every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the third thing that you mentioned was about adversity, about overcoming adversity. I'd like to start with you. Again, I find your journey as interesting as many of the athletes, because you've lived and worked in a one-of-a-kind capacity from my many years of studying leaders. So I look to you as one of those leaders. And on this call, on this podcast, this is focused on business leaders across Canada and what they can gain from the people that we have on. So my question to you, Don, is about adversity. If you're comfortable, could you share a story where you face significant adversity and what strategies you use to overcome them?
Well, I would probably say the greatest challenge for me would have been a health challenge where um, I was 40 years old, had my nose broken playing basketball. Basketball seems to be a theme. Playing it happens to be a theme, but I took an elbow, shattered my nose. They were in rebuilding my nose. They found something on my throat while they were rebuilding my nose, and I was underneath the anesthesia for surgery. They checked out what was in my throat. They discovered that I had stage 3 thyroid cancer, that it had already spread through the lymph nodes of my body, and that if I hadn't had this accident, this accident, I might not have known until it was too late, right? But the immediate reaction was that it was, they needed to remove the thyroid. I needed to go through pretty intensive opportunity to deal with some chemo and radiation, and through all of it, the one thing that kept me going was this belief that clearly, it's not meant to end here, right? I think mindset is massive, and I think almost every doctor will tell you, hope, it may not be a good battle strategy or, anything else, but hope is enormously important in healthcare. And you have to believe that there's something better on the other side. And I did so intensely that my treatment kind of went flawlessly, but it allowed me to kind of make but it also settled me down and got me to think differently about life. I think cancer will do that. I'm going to guess many of your listeners probably either have had their own experience or have a opportunity to know someone who've been through it. It's not a word you want to hear anywhere. And so I would say that managing that and realizing the power of my own mindset to help me likely heal better and was a real awakening for me. I knew it. I'd studied it, but I'd never had to experience it until that.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
I don't talk about it often, so thank you.
Did writing a book with Tug McGraw, was that in any way helpful? Did that coincide with that time frame? Because I remember the reason I ask is, in the book, one thing that really stood out to me was in a different context, but I know he had struggles with cancer, was he kept saying in a baseball context, you got to believe.
You got to believe.
Yes, right, that you got to believe, that's one of the quotes that I've put over here is you got to believe, is having that eternal optimism and that faith going into a situation where you don't have all the answers and it's rife with uncertainty.
So my cancer actually occurred after I wrote the book with Tug.
Yeah.
And so there was actually there was a reality in that too. Tug was the most, infectiously positive person I'd ever been around. He did. You got to believe is his phrase, right? He coined it for his baseball team when he was playing in New York, and the idea, you know, you got to belief alone does not simply do it. Like I couldn't, even if I had the most positive mindset, and if I hadn't gone through the radiation, the chemo, if I hadn't been a great candidate for those treatments, it wouldn't have worked. And it didn't work for Tug. I mean, he was very positive. He still passed away. So, I don't in any way pretend to believe that a positive mindset cures all. But what I do know is it makes the journey, it does enhance the opportunity for success by the account of most doctors I've worked with. But yeah, it was interesting because I knew I was going to try to be going to have a positive mindset as I went through treatment. But I also knew that Tug did, and he still passed. So I think I'm always careful not to say if you believe it, you can achieve it, right? It's not about belief. You still have to do all the right things, and the right conditions have to present themselves for you, and they did for me.
By the way, how are we for time, Don?
I'm good.
Okay, thank you.
I think I held, till 2:00.
Perfect, thank you. One thing I noticed about you, even how you showed up in this interview, you show up with it's positive, it's warmth. There's an enthusiasm that you seem to put in, and this is the first time we're talking face to face, but this is my first impression of you, this enthusiasm, this emotional energy that you see it and you know it when you see it with people. And I know how busy you are. So my question to you is, and this is another quote from the book, and I wonder how it applies to your life. One man, or we'll say person here, has enthusiasm for 30 minutes, another for 30 days. Yet it's the man or person who has it for 30 years who makes a success of his or their life. How do you, Don, maintain enthusiasm over the past, you said 30 years of your journey from going to university, working at Sports Illustrated, writing 11 New York Times bestselling books?
By the way, my Deion Sanders book just became my 12th New York Times bestseller. It just happened a couple days ago. So crazy.
Well, in Canada, I'm in Toronto, I was with my 12-year-old son, and I was telling him about this interview. And I said, Kobe, name's Kobe Bryant. I said, you're going to love to listen to this interview when it's out, because he's really into sport, getting into sports now. And I said, let me tell you about who he's interviewing, who he just wrote a book about. And as soon as I said that, we're walking through Indigo, which is like Barnes and Nobles in the United States. And he points and he goes, there he is. And it was right on. It was the main centerpiece in this Toronto bookstore. But he noticed not Prime. He said, that's the guy, Don Yaeger. I went, yeah, that's him.
I like Kobe. Kobe's my guy. Tell Kobe I'll pass him the ball anytime.
So congratulations on that. So how do you do it? How do you maintain this infectious, enthusiastic attitude, which clearly has served you well in your careers? I say plural.
Thank you. I would tell you, I think a big piece of it is simply it is a belief that every day is an opportunity to get better, number one. And I do believe that I can get better there's some part of my life I will get better at today, and so I'm constantly trying to make sure that I don't miss that moment when I get a chance to get better today. And the opportunity that I hope that in some way my getting better will allow me to help make somebody else better. And I think if I do those two things every day, and I maintain that, then it's hard not to be enthusiastic. Like how exciting, I mean, who's got it better than me, right? Jim Harbaugh loves to say that. And every time he says it, every time I hear him say it on TV, I'm going, me, I got it better than you. And so, but it's, it's how do you view your circumstances? And I don't have some magic equation or anything else. I do believe I get better today, which allows me to make somebody else better today. And that makes today a pretty darn amazing opportunity.
Mm-hmm. The best in different fields who I've met are always working to improve. It's one of the commonalities that I've seen when I worked in the entertainment field with top comedians. I've seen it with the top keynote speakers, and you're just validating that point because you have several checklists as, top speaker, top podcast host, top thought leader, and top writer, author. So what I want to ask you, Don, along the lines of transitions. So you you have become, over the past, I don't know how many years, one of the top keynote speakers in North America. You're clearly probably the number one, although you wouldn't say it, nonfiction author. And you have a successful podcast and more. Can you identify any crucial turning points in your career that helped you make these transitions or to add different career paths?
So thank you. That's a great question, because I do think a really important piece is always adding a new career path. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a path you completely follow, but add it while you're, at your very best in the career you're in. So for me, I started really learning about becoming a speaker while I was at the peak of what you would argue, my professional career as a writer at Sports Illustrated. Right? I mean, at the time, it was the best, sports magazine in the world. It was, it had one of the greatest subscription lists. It had everything you would want. Being at Sports Illustrated was a big deal. Well, while I was there, I started learning how to become a speaker. While I was there, I was investing in companies to learn how to become an entrepreneur. So I think, unfortunately, too often we make career shifts, or we make changes when they're required of us, right? When suddenly we've lost something or something has ended, and now we've got to go create something. I've always been, my curiosity is, I think, my greatest strength. I have a friend who says a lot of people have great IQ. That was never me. A lot of people have great EQ. That was my EQ is okay. But he used to say that I always had the highest CQ of anybody he ever met, curiosity quotient. I ask questions everywhere I go. I'm always trying to, if you're doing something that intrigues me, I'm following you. I'm trying to learn from it. I'm trying to figure it out. So have a high CQ and start working on other opportunities while you're at the peak of your performance in the opportunity that you're currently in, because you never know. I mean, I'm so grateful that I started doing the speaking thing, because Sports Illustrated today is not what it was when I left, 15 years ago. The magazine industry is not what it was when I left. So television, you name it, right? Entertainment, it's all these industries are constantly changing. And if we're not changing ahead of that, if we're waiting to change when it's required, we're screwed, basically.
Mm-hmm. You talked about curiosity, and you have this gift of being able to connect with some of the most successful people ever in sports, in the business world. What is it about the way that you ask questions, the way that you're curious, that builds trust and rapport with these types of high achievers?
It's a great question. I think the real answer is that it's about thoughtful and very, I don't want to use the word strategic because it might sound too concocted, but very thoughtful approach to asking questions. There are some people I've asked amazingly difficult questions of questions that they had to dig really deep, that if you ask it too early, they'll never get there with you, right? You have to establish something with people. There's a need, a desire to try to find common ground and places where we have something that we're working through or have worked through together, or similarly, that allow us to feel now they're no longer a superstar and I'm no longer a writer. We're just two people going through something, right? And then when it gets to the question, you can ask it in a way that doesn't feel threatening or so I think a big piece of it is understanding timing. You get timing as well as anybody, right? Timing is important, but beyond that, it's also it is about authenticity. It's this belief that, you know, they're not asking this question hurtfully. I mean, I've asked hurtful questions of people about that it made them, you know, nearly cry at times while we're talking. But they know I'm not trying to hurt them. You know, I've asked hurtful questions, but they haven't, it's not because I was trying to hurt them, if that makes any sense. But part of it is they know that that I've earned the right to be trusted by them.
You've earned the right to be trusted by them. And what makes a great question?
I think what makes a great question is something that makes, we've all, I mean, just like that question right there. I don't know that I've ever been really asked that question. We've all been asked. There's so many questions in our life that we've all been asked that you almost have programmed, you know, you could just like press a button and okay, here we go. I could just program the answer for that question because I've been asked it so many times. I could give you the answer that I've given everybody else and you'll be satisfied, right? A great question generally leads somebody to a conversation or a piece of themselves that they didn't actively come prepared to share. So I'm looking for ways to get people, you know, I'll never forget. I had one day, many of your folks have probably seen the movie The Blind Side, right? So I did a book with a young man who was a centerpiece of The Blind Side. I did 2 books with him actually, but the first one was back years ago when the movie, you know, was just at its apex. And I asked him about the lady from the state agency whose job it was to constantly track him down, to constantly pull him off the streets and put him, you know, into a more fixed environment. What he would say now that his life has turned and he's in a better condition, if he ever had the chance to meet her again, what would he say to her? And he never thought about the idea that there might one day be the chance for him to go meet her again. He never thought about what he would say if he ever took that chance. But as he was thinking about it, I went out and figured out where she was. So that once he came to me and said, this is what I'd say, I went, do you want to go say it? And so I had the opportunity to take him to go sit down with the woman who saved his life, if you will, right? And let him say thank you. And for all the young people whose lives she saved over her career, no one ever came back to say thank you. So this was an enormously emotional opportunity for both of them that in its own way, I got the chance to orchestrate just by asking questions. And so, trying to get people to think about things that they hadn't previously really discussed or disclosed, but doing it in a non-threatening way so they don't feel like I'm going to hurt them if they get into the conversation with me. That's a really long answer.
Well, thank you. Perfect. It's so moving because as soon as you were saying that, and I was working on being as present as I could, my mind started racing and saying, who in my past, whether it was a teacher, a mentor, a role model, who I might have had good intentions, I might have thought about it, but I didn't take the time to thank them. What about you? Is there someone in your past, as you reflect on that story, who you feel, even in this moment now, you could go back and thank them because they might not have truly understood the impact they had on your life in the past?
So it's funny you ask it in this context. We're in a podcast, right? And you've made a couple of references to the fact that I have a podcast. And so my podcast is where I take business leaders, people who are very successful in business, and ask them about, for a little piece of the interview, it's about what all of them I know because of my research played sports at at an earlier stage in their life. Being a part of a team made them a better leader today than they would have been if they hadn't had that experience. So I want to talk about sports and business together at the same time. But one of the things we did early on was we would ask kind of a question: is there any, tell me about some mentor, somebody that was impactful to you. And one of my early guests was she was a senior leader at General Mills at the time. She went on to lead a $8 billion division of Amazon. Amazing woman named Carla Vernon, and she told us the story about this woman who had been so impactful in her life when she was a young dancer in Buffalo, New York. And Carla's African American, and there weren't a lot of African American women dancers at the time. So she, this teacher had really poured into her. Well, I took advantage of that, went and found the lady and played her what Carla said about her. And this lady then I got a chance to connect Carla back to this woman again. And that moment fully inspired me to try to do exactly what you just asked me. I found a handful of folks who I believe played a real role in my development, not always positively, right? Some days it was because they beat me up pretty badly. But I gained so much. And so I went back and I did exactly what I did for Carla, but I did it for myself. I went to these three people and actually tracked them down and just said, look, in one case, it didn't end very well, right? The relationship didn't end well because I didn't like what they said to me. But what they said was right. And what they taught me was right. I just didn't want to hear it. And I went back 25 years later to say thank you. And it was really impactful. So I love that. It's a great question. But it's something, it's also a great exercise if somebody takes time to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for giving that really crystal clear example, because I think it's something that we all, including myself, need to do more of, which is thank those mentors. Someone on the Academy Awards did it. I think Billie Eilish indirectly got up there, one of the biggest music stars in the world, only 22 years old. And she said, I want to thank, I'm paraphrasing here, I might not be 100% accurate. I want to thank one of my teachers, all my music teachers, especially this one who you didn't really like me, but I just want to tell you that you really helped me. And that became national news, international news. They tracked down this teacher, as you did with your guest on the podcast, running this $8 billion division. And they asked her, did you know that you had the impact on Billie Eilish? And she said, no idea. And so can you imagine how that teacher who's been teaching 20, 30, 40 years felt when one of the biggest stars in the world happened to give her tough love the thumbs up?
It's awesome. But I mean, in our podcast, I've done that several times where I've asked about that and then gone back to track down. In one case, the coach that the guy talked about had passed away, but I went and found his children and again, played for the children the words that this now big time executive at Sony TV, Sony Productions, said about about this high school coach, and it just meant the world, right? To realize that we all want to believe we've left a mark in the world, right? Not all of us get a chance to really see the mark.
Yeah. And on Corporate Competitor podcast, you are looking at and speaking with some of the most successful leaders from the business world. I listened recently to David Rogier, the founder of Masterclass, and Rachel, if I pronounce her last name, Barger,
Yep.
Cisco executive.
Yep.
And they are leaving their marks in different ways from what I heard, taking the common denominator of sports in some capacity, and those lessons being integrated into their work. Don, what makes a great leader?
Wow. Boy, I tell you, that's such a big question. I think to make a great leader, I think what you're trying to do is convince people that they're capable of doing something that they wouldn't naturally believe they're capable of. Because if you believe it, you don't really need me, right? Because you could probably go. And then once you've got those people to believe that they're capable, actually taking them someplace that they wouldn't naturally go. A great leader is going to take you to through an experience or an opportunity that you wouldn't find just if you just happened to be working day to day on your own and you didn't have guidance. You didn't have. John Wooden once said a great leader for him was someone that could see around corners, right? Someone who actually, because it's easy to see directly straight ahead. The great leaders are the ones that see what's waiting for you around the corner. So they have a sense of a presence, a sense of being that allows you to feel a level of comfort that will allow you to achieve something you wouldn't necessarily otherwise believe you could. A great leader will bring all of that to you.
What else did you learn from Coach Wooden that stands in and is part of who you are today?
Well, Coach, so our relationship was really it began very randomly. I was a writer at Sports Illustrated. I had heard at the time that Shaquille O'Neal, who was playing for the LA Lakers back then, so he's 26 years old. He's the star of the NBA. He's making bad movies like Kazam. And I'd heard that Shaq was going out regularly to sit with John Wooden and learn from him. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. Like how amazing is that, right? And I reached out, and Shaq's response was, yeah, they're mentoring sessions. And I thought, wow, 88-year-old white guy, John Wooden, 26-year-old black guy, Shaq. Other than basketball, what could they talk about? And they were doing this monthly, right? So I asked if I could attend one of their sessions, and they let me. And I sat there, and I marveled because they never talked about basketball. They talked about being a better husband, how to be a better teammate, how to be a better father. These were less. Shaq came with a list of questions he wanted to learn, right? Which I thought was just fantastic. And so I got up as we're leaving, and I said, Coach Wooden, you're one of the most extraordinary men on the planet. How does someone get mentored by someone like you? And he looked at me and he said, you ask.
Wow.
And I said, how many people ask? And he said, not as many as you might think. And I thought, wow, how crazy is that? And he said, yeah, most people immediately assume you'd have no time for them, right? That there's no way you'd make time for them. So they don't even ask. And they cost themselves the opportunity if they did. So I went away, wrote a little piece about, what I watched and witnessed, and got back with Coach Wooden a few weeks later. And I said, Coach, what did you think of the story? He was very gracious. And I said, Coach, as I was standing there, I felt like I was supposed to ask. And he looked at me and he said, what took you so long?
Incredible.
And for the next 12 years, every other month, I flew to California to spend a day with John Wooden, learning from this amazing man. But the greatest lesson he shared with me was this idea that we should all have mentors and be mentoring someone all the time. Like the universe is really only complete if we're doing both of those things. And but great mentors aren't out handing out business cards, right? They aren't out giving out their phone numbers. The great ones are you have to ask. You have to initiate the contact. And so my great fortune was he accepted my invitation. He accepted my ask and allowed me to come learn from him. And over the course of that time, some of my greatest memories are times sitting with Coach Wood and just asking, coming well prepared for every session. I had a list of questions, things I wanted to learn from him every time I went to visit. And that, again, an important part of a good mentoring relationship is being respectful of each other's time. And it was really, really powerful.
Well, Don, I feel like this has been the ultimate mentorship this past 50 minutes or so. Your generosity, your warmth, your wisdom, and really just sharing with us all the lessons, all the takeaways, the stories that have made your sui generis, one-of-a-kind career and life so inspiring. So I want to thank you. And before we go, I want to ask you, where can folks, business leaders across the country of Canada, find you?
Thanks, Jamie. And by the way, I'm a huge fan, so I'm grateful that we got a chance to do this. And, I know you and I follow each other a lot on social media, and I love your work. And so thank you. But I'm just easily found at donyaeger.com. It's Don, DONYAEGER.com. Though I own the other spelling also. Everybody should always find, if there's a misspelled version of your name, own that on the internet if you can. But in doing so, I'd be honored to be in touch with any of the folks. I'm very active on LinkedIn specifically. So as a social, if that's one that they might find me, that'd be great.
Don, it's been an honor and a privilege. And this has been another episode of The Leadership Standard. Thank you.